Being established in 1886, General Motors catapulted into becoming one of the biggest manufacturers in the American automotive industry. Back in the early days, it was simply known as the Flint Road Cart Company, and its main objective was to build horse-drawn carriages. By 1908, the company was rebranded as General Motors, and at that point, things really started to take off. GM has been behind some of the best-loved cars, trucks, and SUVs. They've had legendary nameplates and even some that were popular with pop culture, and over time, we had quite a selection of brands to choose from. But things are different nowadays. General Motors has been streamlined, consisting of Chevy, GMC, Cadillac, and Buick. And as of right now, we can expect all of those brands to stick around. Throughout its existence, the number of brands under GM has stretched far beyond the ones I just mentioned. So if you're wondering what happened to those other brands, well, the execs at GM decided to move on from them over the years by either selling them or simply stopping production on them. So without further ado, let's look at the car brands that GM has discontinued. The former Pontiac brand was dubbed the Excitement Division. Pontiac was a division of General Motors for almost a century, with the brand name being spawned from Oakland Motor Car. This Oakland Motor Car was first acquired by GM in 1909, and in the 1920s, the first Pontiac car hit the scene. In the 1930s, GM had dropped the Oakland name in favor of Pontiac. This brand would take on the reputation of being a solid performer for the Michigan-based company over the next several decades. During the muscle car era of the 1960s and 1970s, Pontiac would become a household name, with models like the GTO, Trans Am, and Firebird, of course. Pontiac was actually a strong selling division for GM throughout the decades. But once the 2000s hit, Pontiac and other GM brands were being outsold by Toyota. And what happened was Toyota ended up taking the title of world's best-selling car maker from GM. Well, Pontiac did try to recapture some of its excitement or otherwise entice enthusiastic buyers. For instance, buyers said they wanted a V8 sedan, so Pontiac threw the Northstar powered Bonneville GXP at us. And we also got the front wheel drive LS4 powered Grand Prix GXP. So around that time, we even got the Holden Monaro, which was recreated as the new Pontiac GTO. A front wheel drive sedan with an 8-cylinder mill was okay, but it wasn't exactly what enthusiasts wanted. Pontiac got taken a little more seriously when they took the tire shredding Holden Commodore and turned it into the G8. And in top trim GXP form, this new rear-wheel drive sedan, it cranked out a whopping 415 horsepower, and that was crazy by 2009 standards. But all this newfound excitement was a little too late. It was around this time when the American economy took a drastic nosedive that eventually led GM to accept a government bailout. Looking to save money anywhere it could amid Chapter 11 filings, survival ultimately meant discontinuing the Pontiac brand altogether, with the brand being shuttered once and for all in 2010. And it's kind of crazy because I actually like Pontiac. I've always been a fan of the Grand Prix, whether that's the G body or the W body. And I actually like the Bonneville too, like the last generation Bonneville, the SSEI, and I thought the GXP was a cool concept, although it was front wheel drive, but they definitely had some cool cars. Will they ever be brought back? Who knows? Probably not, but I guess only time will tell, right? So Saturn began with the S series, and this was a family of cars which included a sporty compact coupe with sleek styling and pop-up headlights, as well as an affordable economical sedan from 1990 to 2002. And there was also a station wagon from 1993 to 2001. Later on, we got the mid-size L series, which targeted the Honda Accord. This series included a station wagon and a sedan. When the L series came out in 2000, it was built at Wilmington, Delaware. It had the same engine and platform as the Vectra, but the engine was available in both 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder versions. Saturn did release a lot of products during its production run, but in its early years, the S series were the most popular. But going all the way back to 1984, this was actually when Saturn's first concept car was built, with the company officially being formed a year later. During the time, Saturn was a private entity owned by former GM execs, By the late 80s, GM had officially acquired the brand, with the first new Saturns rolling off the assembly lines in 1990. So pretty much Saturn was positioned to target Japanese brands, and they were making the kind of cars that were economical, practical, and affordable. So once Saturn's new cars hit the market, they were an immediate hit, and by 1994, they were ranked among the top 3 best-selling cars in America. The vehicles remained popular with car shoppers for most of the 90s and early 2000s, but by the mid-2000s, things started to change, and all that initial enthusiasm started to wear down a little bit. So fingers were pointed at the execs for overall mismanagement as well as issues from the UAW, but it was also a change in consumer preferences that played a role in the brand's demise. Either way, Saturn didn't survive GM's Chapter 11 filings in 2009, and this brand was also shuttered. And it's crazy because I like Saturn too. I think they had some neat cars back in the day. I thought the SC was pretty cool with the flip up headlights and all that. But at least they tried. But it's kind of sad what happened with this brand too, because I actually like Saturn. Now, when GM announced that it would be terminating this brand, it was quite shocking to loyal customers and enthusiasts. So this brand was purchased by GM in 1908, and Oldsmobile was actually one of the longest running brands under GM once it was discontinued. It was reported that the brand was one of GM's best sellers even through the 1980s, when it was moving more than a whopping 1 million units per year. But all that changed in the 1990s. Sales had dropped significantly, and it was too much for GM to ignore. But Oldsmobile did try. We got some cool cars like the 1995 V8 powered Aurora, and this was a flagship designed to attract younger buyers. And it was also looking to challenge high dollar imports. And my personal favorite, the W-body Cutlass Supreme convertible. And we got some half-baked ideas too, like the Malibu-based M-body Cutlass, and we also got an all-new Cutlass Supreme sedan, but it got renamed Intrigue at the last minute. Unfortunately though, when the early 2000 models like the 2nd generation Aurora and the 3rd generation Bravada failed to return Oldsmobile to its glory days, the writing was pretty much on the wall, and the execs pulled the plug on this brand in 2004. So the last Oldsmobile was a dark cherry color Alero, and it drove off the production line in 2004 at the Lansing facility. So these are pretty much a more civilized take on the rugged 4-wheel drive Humvee vehicles developed by AM General, which were pretty much for military use. In 1992, AM General began selling consumer converted models to the general public. They were popular, but these would soon become known as big, slow, and thirsty gas guzzlers. And that wasn't ideal by the early 90s. No one wanted that, especially with fuel prices going up a little bit. By the end of the decade, GM had decided to purchase Hummer and position it as a competitor against other popular high-dollar SUVs in the market. And by the early 2000s, these were seen as a status symbol, and they had a sticker price of around $89,000. So GM doubled down on the concept with smaller, less pricey H2 and H3 models. Despite this effort, fuel economy issues plagued both models, and with other manufacturers making more fuel-efficient SUVs, Hummer sales dropped significantly. Once again, the execs could not ignore the issue, and the brand's fate was sealed, alongside Pontiac and Saturn in 2010. So, after GM filed for bankruptcy in 2009, that's pretty much the end of this brand. But nowadays you can still technically get a Hummer, it's just now an EV and sold under the GMC badge now. Saab was a pioneering Swedish car maker with a background in aircraft and military vehicle development. Saab cars were roving the roads of Europe since the 1950s, and these Eurocentric vehicles remained popular ever since. By the 1960s, the North American market had become Saab's biggest export market, and it remained a major market for Saab. When the automaker hit hard times in 1987, GM took notice, got involved, and purchased about 50% of the company. The original Saab 900 ended its run in 1993, but with the 2nd generation in 1994, the GM influence was quite apparent. Unfortunately, this alienated some of the 80s traditional buyers who fretted over Saab losing its uniqueness. They were hardcore fans of the first generation. When the second generation came out, they just saw too much of the GM influence. But on the flip side, sales were beginning to pick up a bit throughout the 90s. GM bought out Saab completely in 2000, rolling out a line of rebadged models. There was even a version of Subaru's WRX called the Saab 92X Aero, which was met with critical praise. With the 2009 economic crash and GM's bankruptcy, things did not look too good for this brand either. Dutch carmaker Spyker acquired Saab in 2010 in a deal that saw GM retain $300 million in preferred shares. That stake would soon come into play as GM blocked an offer from a Chinese manufacturer to become Saab's largest investor. Since that deal got shot down, Saab finally declared bankruptcy in December 2011. Holden began working with GM in 1917 when they began making car bodies for Chevrolets in Australia. The companies joined forces in the 1930s, becoming known as General Motors Holden's Ltd, with Holden branded vehicles becoming a staple within the Australian car market throughout the next several decades. From the 1980s and beyond though, sales were relatively lackluster and not quite what GM had anticipated, but despite that, GM stuck with Holden until 2020 when it finally announced the end of the brand. GM has done its share of badge engineering over the years with relatively short-lived brands like Geo, Asuna, Acadian, Beaumont, Envoy, and Daewoo is an exception of the rebadged group. And coming from South Korea, despite its cars being rebadged as Holdens in Australia, for the most part, these cars were manufactured as original models until Chevy ceased production in 2011. There have been rumors that Buick might also have been on the chopping block. Buick is quite successful in the Chinese market, and they even sell sedans over there still. But here in America, things are a little different. With an all SUV lineup, many say that Buick has lost its identity. But GM has dismissed rumors of Buick being phased out, so I guess only time will tell. But let us know in the comments section which brands would you like to see make a comeback. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.